September 19th, 1944. Lorraine, northeastern France. Dawn arrives slowly over the quiet farmland near the village of Arracourt. The fields are still damp from the night. Rows of harvested grain stretch across low hills, broken only by dirt roads, scattered barns, and thin lines of trees. But this morning, the land is hidden beneath a thick autumn fog. Visibility is barely a few hundred yards. Inside several American tanks, engines idle softly. The machines are M4 Shermans, their metal hulls damp with condensation. Crews sit quietly in the cramped turrets. Most of them are young, many barely in their 20s. Farm boys from places like Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska. Before the war, some had never seen a tank. Many had never left their hometowns. Now they are part of the U.S. 4th Armored Division, spearheading General George Patton's Third Army across France. Suddenly, through the fog, shapes begin to appear on the distant ridgeline. Large silhouettes, long gun barrels, German Panther tanks. On paper, the Panthers are far more powerful than the Shermans waiting below. Thicker armor, longer-range guns, designed specifically to destroy Allied tanks. But over the next several days, something unexpected will happen on these quiet French fields. A battle will unfold that few German commanders believed possible, and it will begin in this fog. By September 1944, the war in Western Europe had entered a new and unpredictable phase. Just 3 months earlier, on June 6, 1944, Allied forces had landed on the beaches of Normandy during the massive amphibious assault known as the D-Day. 4 weeks afterward, the Allied armies fought their way through the dense hedgerows of northern France. Progress was slow and costly. German defenses were stubborn, and the terrain favored defenders. But everything changed in late July. On July 25, 1944, American forces launched Operation Cobra. The operation shattered the German front lines south of St. Lo. Waves of Allied bombers pounded German positions, and American armored divisions poured through the breach. Suddenly, the battlefield transformed. What had been a slow war of attrition became a fast-moving campaign across France. German units began retreating eastward in disorder. Roads clogged with damaged vehicles, supply trucks, and columns of exhausted soldiers. The once formidable German army in the west was struggling to reform coherent defensive lines. Leading the American advance was George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army. Patton believed in speed, aggression, and relentless pressure. Once his army broke out of Normandy, he pushed his forces forward with remarkable momentum. American armored columns raced across the French countryside. Entire regions were liberated in days. Cities that had endured 4 years of German occupation suddenly saw American tanks rolling through their streets. French civilians lined the roads, cheering and waving flags. For many Allied soldiers, the rapid advance created the sense that Germany's defeat might come quickly. But the reality was more complicated. As the American armies pushed deeper into France, they encountered a growing problem: supply. The rapid advance stretched Allied logistics to their limits. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts had to travel hundreds of miles from the Normandy beaches. Trucks struggled to keep up with a moving front. Meanwhile, German commanders were doing everything possible to stabilize the situation. Despite their retreat, the German army still possessed powerful armored formations. Some of these units had been refitting inside Germany. Others were reorganized from battered divisions that had escaped destruction in Normandy. German leadership believed they still had one advantage: their tanks. Among the most feared of these was the Panther tank. Introduced in 1943, the Panther had been designed as a direct response to the Soviet T-34. It combined sloped armor, a powerful 75mm high-velocity cannon, and excellent long-range accuracy. Against many Allied tanks, the Panther was deadly. At long distances, its gun could destroy enemy armor before opponents even came within effective firing range. Its thick frontal armor made it extremely difficult to penetrate head-on. Facing these machines were American M4 Sherman tanks. On paper, the comparison did not look favorable for the Americans. The Sherman's main gun was less powerful. Its armor was thinner. Many crews knew that in a direct, long-range duel, the Panther usually had the advantage. Yet American armored doctrine emphasized something different. Instead of relying on a single superior tank, the U.S. Army built its strategy around mobility, coordination, and combined arms. Tanks worked alongside reconnaissance units, infantry, artillery, and aircraft. Radios allowed commanders to communicate quickly across the battlefield, coordinating movements in ways many German units struggled to match late in the war. The Americans also had one major advantage: reliability. Sherman tanks were easier to maintain, faster to repair, and more mechanically dependable during long operations. While German Panthers were powerful, there were also complex machines that required significant maintenance. As the Allied advance continued into eastern France, the strategic focus shifted toward the region of Lorraine. Lorraine was not just another province on the map. For centuries, it had served as a corridor between Germany and France. Whoever controlled this region could influence the movement of armies across Western Europe. Rivers, rolling farmland, and scattered towns created a landscape well suited for armored warfare. By mid-September 1944, American forces had reached this area. Among them was the powerful 4th Armored Division, one of the spearheads of Patton's Third Army. Its tanks and crews had already traveled hundreds of miles since the breakout from Normandy. But as they moved deeper into Lorraine, German commanders were preparing something that could change the momentum of the campaign. A counterattack, one built around their most powerful weapon, the Panther, and the quiet farmland near Arracourt would soon become the center of that plan. By the middle of September 1944, the German High Command faced a dangerous reality. Across Western Europe, their armies were falling back. The destruction of large German formations during the Falaise Pocket had crippled the Wehrmacht's ability to hold a continuous defensive line in France. Thousands of vehicles had been destroyed or abandoned. Entire divisions had ceased to exist. Yet despite these losses, German leadership refused to accept a purely defensive war. Adolf Hitler and his senior commanders believed that a strong counterattack could still disrupt the Allied advance. If they could strike one of the fast-moving American armored spearheads, they might slow the momentum of George S. Patton and his advancing U.S. Third Army. The region of Lorraine offered an opportunity. Lorraine was not heavily urbanized. Much of the landscape consisted of farmland, gentle ridges, and open fields, terrain well suited for armored maneuver. German commanders believed that if they could concentrate enough tanks in this region, they could launch a sudden strike against the advancing American forces. To carry out this plan, the German army began assembling newly created armored formations known as Panzer brigades. These units were a late-war emergency measure. Earlier in the war, Germany had relied primarily on large, fully organized panzer divisions. But by 1944, losses had become so severe that German planners experimented with smaller, rapidly formed armored brigades designed specifically for counterattacks. Two of these formations would play a central role in the coming battle: Panzer Brigade 111 and Panzer Brigade 113. On paper, these brigades looked formidable. Each contained several dozen Panther tank vehicles, supported by armored infantry carried in half-tracks, reconnaissance elements, and supporting artillery. The Panther itself was widely regarded as one of the most dangerous tanks on the battlefield. Its long-barreled 75mm cannon could destroy most Allied tanks at long distances. Its thick-sloped armor made frontal hits difficult to penetrate. Many German commanders believed that if Panthers could engage American tanks across open ground, they would dominate the fight. There was, however, a serious problem. Many of these new Panzer brigades were assembled in haste. Some of their crews were experienced veterans transferred from older units, but many others were newly trained replacements with limited combat experience. Equipment shortages meant that some support units were incomplete. Communication and coordination between armored and infantry elements were often weaker than in earlier German formations. Still, German planners believed the Panthers' raw firepower would compensate for these weaknesses. The target of their counterattack will be the advancing American armored formations operating near the small town of Arracourt. In this area, the 4th Armored Division had pushed forward rapidly, extending the reach of Patton's spearhead. If German Panthers could strike this division quickly and with enough force, they might break through the American line and disrupt the advance toward Germany. Timing would be critical. German commanders hoped to attack during periods of heavy fog common in the Lorraine countryside during autumn mornings. Reduced visibility could allow their armored columns to move into position before American reconnaissance aircraft spotted them. But the same fog that concealed movement would also limit visibility for tank gunners. Long-range engagements, the kind that favored the Panther, would become far more difficult. Instead, combat would likely occur at much shorter distances. Distances where maneuver, communication, and quick reactions could become just as important as armor thickness. In the quiet fields surrounding Arracourt, these conditions were beginning to form. American tank crews did not yet know that large numbers of German Panthers were moving toward them. German commanders, meanwhile, believed they were about to deliver a decisive blow. What neither side fully understood was that the coming battle would reveal something far more complex than a simple contest between two types of tanks. Because once the fighting began, it would not be decided only by machines. It would be shaped by terrain, by leadership, and by the decisions of the young crews inside those tanks. When historians later examined the Battle of Arracourt, they discovered that the outcome could not be explained by armor thickness or gun size alone. The battle revealed several overlapping realities of modern warfare, and each of them played a role in what unfolded across the foggy fields of Lorraine. Many of the men inside the tanks of the 4th Armored Division did not come from large cities or military families. They came from farms, from small towns scattered across the American Midwest and Great Plains. Before the war, some had driven tractors across open fields. Others had worked with machinery in barns or repair sheds. A few had grown up fixing engines simply because farm life required it. These experiences, simple as they seemed, had unexpected value inside a tank. Operating an M4 Sherman required constant teamwork. The driver, gunner, loader, and commander each had specific responsibilities, but survival depended on coordination. Crews learned to anticipate each other's movements. Communication became instinctive. Many American tank crews had also been training together for months, sometimes years. By the time they reached France in 1944, their coordination inside the vehicle had become almost automatic. In battle, this mattered. When a commander shouted a direction or a gunner called out a target, the rest of the crew reacted immediately. Seconds could determine whether a tank fired first or was destroyed. These crews were young, often inexperienced in life beyond their hometowns. But by 1944, they were becoming highly skilled armored soldiers. On paper, the comparison between the Panther tank and the M4 Sherman appeared one-sided. The Panther's armor was thicker. Its gun had greater range and penetrating power. German designers had built it specifically to defeat enemy armor at distance. In open terrain with long visibility, the Panther could often destroy a Sherman before the American tank could effectively respond. Yet the comparison overlooked several critical factors. The Sherman was mechanically simpler and more reliable. Its engine required less maintenance. Spare parts were widely available. Field repairs were faster and easier. This meant American armored units could keep more tanks operational during long campaigns. The Sherman also had advantages in mobility and crew ergonomics. Its turret rotated quickly. Controls were generally easier for crews to operate under pressure. Most importantly, American tanks were equipped with dependable radios. This allowed tank commanders to coordinate movements, request artillery support, or call for reconnaissance updates in real time. In contrast, some German armored units, especially newly formed brigades, struggled with communication problems during fast-moving engagements. Technology alone did not determine victory. The way that technology was used often mattered more. The landscape around Arracourt shaped the battle in ways that neither side fully predicted. Lorraine's farmland was not flat, open desert. Instead, the terrain consisted of rolling ridges, shallow valleys, and scattered villages. Fields were divided by hedges, dirt roads, and patches of woodland. Hills often blocked long lines of sight. In September, the region also experienced frequent morning fog. On many days, visibility was limited to a few hundred yards. These conditions changed the nature of armored combat. At long range, the Panther's powerful cannon gave it a clear advantage. But when fog reduced visibility, tank battles could occur at very short distances. Sometimes tanks did not see each other until they were already dangerously close. In these moments, quick maneuvering became more important than long-range accuracy. Sherman crews could use terrain to approach enemy tanks from unexpected directions, moving along the reverse sides of hills, through villages, or along concealed roads. Ambushes became possible, and in a battle where one side expected to dominate at long range, the sudden collapse of visibility could completely alter the balance. In the coming days, these conditions would repeatedly shape the encounters between American and German armored units. But the outcome of the battle would depend on more than terrain and machinery, because behind the tanks were the commanders directing them, and the tactical systems guiding every movement across the battlefield. As the battle around Arracourt unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the fight was not simply between two types of tanks. It was also a contest between two very different military systems, different doctrines, different command styles, and different levels of battlefield flexibility. By 1944, the United States Army had developed a battlefield doctrine that emphasized combined arms coordination. Tanks did not operate alone. Instead, armored units worked closely with reconnaissance vehicles, infantry, artillery batteries, and sometimes aircraft. Information moved quickly between these elements through a reliable network of radio communications. Within the 4th Armored Division, reconnaissance units often moved ahead of the main force, searching for enemy movement. If German tanks were spotted, The information could be transmitted immediately to nearby commanders. Artillery support was another crucial element. American armored units could call in rapid artillery fire from nearby batteries. Well-trained forward observers could adjust the fire in real time, directing shells onto enemy formations even when tanks themselves could not clearly see their targets. This system created a layered battlefield response. If German tanks appeared, they were not only facing American armor, they were potentially facing artillery, tank destroyers, and maneuvering Shermans working together. The result was a level of coordination that could quickly overwhelm isolated enemy formations. The German armored units approaching Arracourt possessed formidable machines. The Panther tank remained one of the most dangerous tanks in the war. However, the structure of the units using them created serious limitations. The Panzer Brigade 111 and Panzer Brigade 113 had been created rapidly during the summer of 1944. They were intended to serve as quick-response armored strike forces. But speed came at a cost. Many crews had limited time to train together. Some tank commanders had only recently taken command of their vehicles. Coordination between tanks and supporting infantry was often weaker than in earlier German panzer divisions. In addition, some logistical elements were incomplete. Fuel shortages, maintenance challenges, and limited spare parts could affect operational readiness. Panthers were powerful but mechanically complex machines, and breakdowns were not uncommon during long movements. These issues did not make the German brigades ineffective, but they meant that their battlefield performance depended heavily on maintaining the conditions where the Panthers' strengths, long-range firepower, and strong frontal armor could dominate the fight. If those conditions disappeared, the balance could shift quickly. Another important factor shaping the coming battle was leadership at the tactical level. The American armored forces in the region operated under commanders who encouraged aggressive maneuver and initiative. Among the key figures was John S. Wood. Wood believed strongly in mobility and rapid decision-making. He pushed his officers to maintain momentum and exploit opportunities as they appeared on the battlefield. Subordinate commanders were often given flexibility to act independently when situations changed. This approach worked well in fast-moving armored warfare. Tank commanders and platoon leaders could adapt quickly to unexpected threats. If German armor appeared, American units often attempted to maneuver around it rather than confront it directly from the front. German command philosophy had historically valued similar initiative, known as off-track tactic. But by 1944, many German units were operating under increasing pressure and shortages. New formations sometimes lacked the experienced leadership that earlier panzer divisions had possessed. As a result, when sudden battlefield situations developed, especially in low visibility, some German units struggled to react as quickly as their American opponents. These differences in doctrine and leadership would soon collide on the fields of Lorraine. Because on the morning of September 19, 1944, German Panthers began moving forward toward American positions near Arracourt. And within the heavy fog covering the countryside, the first encounters between the two armored forces were about to begin. On the morning of September 19, 1944, the countryside around Arracourt was almost completely hidden beneath a thick layer of fog. Visibility was extremely limited. In many places, tank crews could see only a few hundred yards ahead of them. The rolling farmland of Lorraine seemed quiet, almost empty. But across those same fields, German armored columns were already moving. Units from Panzer Brigade 111 had begun advancing toward American positions. Their objective was simple: locate and destroy the forward elements of the 4th Armored Division, disrupting the spearhead of George S. Patton's advancing U.S. Third Army. Inside the advancing German tanks were crews who believed they held the advantage. Their Panther tank machines were powerful and heavily armed. Many German commanders expected that once contact was made, American tanks would struggle to survive. But the battlefield they entered was not ideal for long-range gunnery. The fog erased distance. Instead of spotting enemy tanks across wide-open ground, crews often discovered each other suddenly, emerging through the mist at dangerously short ranges. In these conditions, reconnaissance became critical. American scout vehicles moved cautiously along narrow roads and ridgelines, scanning the fog for movement. These lightly armored vehicles often encountered the Germans first. When they did, the reports came quickly over the radio. German tanks approaching. Direction confirmed. American commanders began reacting immediately. Sherman tanks from nearby units started maneuvering toward likely approach routes. Rather than forming static defensive lines, they moved along concealed paths behind ridges and through villages. They were searching for angles. Moments later, the first tank engagements began. Near small villages scattered across the countryside, Shermans encountered Panthers emerging from the fog. In some cases, the tanks spotted each other almost simultaneously. But American crews often reacted faster. Sherman commanders ordered quick maneuvers, turning their tanks toward the flanks of the approaching Panthers whenever possible. The goal was simple: avoid the heavily armored front and strike the weaker side armor instead. At close range, this tactic could be deadly. Several early engagements ended with German Panthers destroyed or disabled after being caught in sudden ambushes. The fog made it difficult for German units to maintain clear formations. Some Panther groups advanced without full knowledge of where American tanks were positioned. Others lost contact with neighboring units entirely. Coordination between tanks and their supporting infantry became difficult in the poor visibility. Meanwhile, American artillery began entering the fight. Forward observers attached to the 4th Armored Division relayed enemy sightings to artillery batteries positioned farther behind the front lines. Soon, shells began landing among German armored formations attempting to advance. Explosions shook the fields. Even when artillery did not destroy tanks directly, it forced German crews to halt or maneuver under pressure. This disruption slowed the momentum of the counterattack. Over the next several hours, more encounters occurred across the area. Sherman units moved aggressively, using the terrain and fog to approach German tanks from unexpected directions. Small groups of American tanks sometimes attacked larger formations, relying on speed and coordination rather than armor strength. The battlefield became chaotic. German commanders attempted to push forward, believing they still possessed superior machines. But the conditions prevented them from using the Panthers' long-range advantages effectively. Instead, they were fighting a close-range armored battle in unfamiliar terrain. By the end of the first day, it was becoming clear that the German counterattack was not unfolding as planned. Several Panthers had already been destroyed. American units remained mobile and coordinated. And as night approached over the mist-covered fields near Arracourt, both sides prepared for further fighting. Because the next phase of the battle would bring even larger German armored forces into the fight. and the struggle for control of the Lorraine countryside was only beginning. The fighting around Arracourt did not end after the first day. Instead, the German command doubled down. Over the following days, particularly between September 20th and September 29th, 1944, additional armored units were pushed into the battle. Elements of Panzer Brigade 113 joined the fight, reinforcing the struggling formations of Panzer Brigade 111. Their mission remained the same: break through the American armored screen, destroy the forward elements of the 4th Armored Division, and halt the momentum of George S. Patton's advancing U.S. Third Army. But the battlefield was already shifting against them. Morning fog continued to blanket much of the Lorraine countryside. Each day began with poor visibility, limiting the ability of German gunners to engage targets at long distances. Instead of dominating the battlefield with superior range, Panther crews often found themselves maneuvering cautiously through terrain where enemy tanks might appear suddenly from behind a ridge or village street. American commanders exploited these conditions relentlessly. Sherman units rarely fought stationary battles. Instead, they moved continuously, relocating after each engagement, shifting along secondary roads, and using the rolling terrain to conceal their positions. Tank platoons coordinated closely with reconnaissance vehicles that searched ahead for approaching German columns. Whenever Panthers were detected, American units attempted to strike them from multiple directions. This was not always easy. The Panther tank remained a formidable opponent. In several engagements, German crews successfully destroyed American M4 Sherman tanks when they managed to fire first. The Panther's high-velocity gun could penetrate a Sherman at significant distances, but such opportunities became rare in the fog-covered fields. Many engagements began at ranges under a few hundred yards. At these distances, the Sherman's mobility became a decisive factor. American tank commanders often maneuvered quickly to the sides of German tanks, targeting their thinner side armor. Some Panthers were destroyed before their crews could even identify the direction of the attack. Others were caught while repositioning after artillery bombardments. American artillery continued to play a major role. Observers positioned with forward armored elements transmitted coordinates back to batteries positioned miles away. When German armor began concentrating in an area, artillery fire could be called in within minutes. Shells burst across fields and roadways, disrupting German movements and forcing crews to halt or scatter. 4 Panther units trying to organize coordinated assaults. This constant disruption was devastating. Weather conditions also began to change. As the fog occasionally lifted during the day, American air power entered the battle. Fighter bombers from the United States Army Air Forces began hunting for German vehicles moving along roads and open terrain. Even when aircraft did not directly destroy tanks, their presence forced German armored columns to disperse and seek cover. This further complicated the German effort to organize a large-scale breakthrough. Meanwhile, American armored units continued to operate with increasing confidence. Sherman crews were learning the terrain quickly. They understood where hills blocked lines of sight, where roads curved through villages, and where Panthers were most likely to appear. With each passing day, German losses increased. Panthers were destroyed in ambushes. Others were disabled by artillery. Some were abandoned after mechanical failures or fuel shortages. The counterattack that had been intended to stop the American advance was slowly turning into a costly struggle for survival. By the end of the fighting around Arracourt, German armored formations had suffered severe losses. Historians later estimated that roughly 200 German armored vehicles, including many Panthers, were destroyed or disabled during the engagements. For the 4th Armored Division, The battle became one of the most significant armored victories achieved by American forces during the war in Western Europe. The German attempt to regain the initiative in Lorraine had failed, but the consequences of that failure would only become fully clear in the days that followed. By the end of September 1944, the fields around Arracourt bore the scars of intense armored combat. Cratered roads and churned-up farmland marked where tanks had maneuvered, collided, or exploded. Burnt-out hulks of Panther tank and M4 Sherman littered the countryside, silent witnesses to the ferocity of the fighting. The first and most obvious result was tactical. The German counterattack aimed at disrupting the 4th Armored Division and halting Patton's Third Army had failed. Panther brigades suffered devastating losses. Reports after the battle indicated that as many as 200 German armored vehicles, many of them Panthers, had been destroyed, disabled, or abandoned. The German brigades, hastily assembled and poorly coordinated, were now combat ineffective. In contrast, American forces emerged largely intact. While the 4th Armored Division had lost a number of Shermans and some personnel, the losses were far lower than those of the Germans. The crews had survived, retained cohesion, and maintained their operational capability. This disparity was remarkable given the raw strength of the German Panthers on paper. Historians later noted that it was not sheer firepower, but combined arms coordination, mobility, and tactical ingenuity that allowed the Americans to succeed. For the men themselves, the immediate aftermath was a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Crews that had faced seemingly unstoppable tanks found themselves victorious, often with minimal losses. Letters sent home described shattered German vehicles, destroyed armor, and the unrelenting tension of battle in fog-shrouded fields. Yet there was little time to celebrate. The Third Army was still advancing, and the next engagement was never far away. Strategically, the battle had immediate consequences. The failure of the German counterattack meant that the Allies retained freedom of movement across Lorraine. Roads and supply lines remained open, allowing Patton's forces to continue their rapid push eastward toward the German border. German commanders had hoped that a successful armored thrust could slow the Third Army for weeks, giving them time to regroup and reinforce other sectors. Instead, the loss of armored vehicles and experienced crews accelerated the collapse of German defensive positions in eastern France. The battlefield itself became a symbol. Lorraine, once considered a possible staging ground for a counteroffensive, was now a zone where American armored forces could operate with confidence. And for the first time, many military observers began to question the prevailing assumptions about tank warfare in 1944, that the Panther was invincible against Sherman armor. The events at Arracourt demonstrated that under the right conditions, trained crews, coordinated tactics, and clever use of terrain, even an outgunned force could triumph decisively over a technically superior opponent. But the broader implications of this victory would only become clear as the campaign continued, reshaping German defensive planning and the Allied approach to armored warfare in Western Europe. In the weeks following the Battle of Arracourt, the implications of the fight became increasingly evident across the Western Front. The German armored brigades that had attempted the counterattack were effectively neutralized. Panzer Brigade 111 and Panzer Brigade 113 had suffered not only heavy equipment losses but also the depletion of experienced tank crews. Many survivors were reassigned to other units, where the loss of cohesion and morale became immediately apparent. Strategically, the Lorraine sector was stabilized. With the German threat diminished, George S. Patton's Third Army could maintain its momentum across northeastern France. The rapid advance continued toward the German frontier, with fewer obstacles in the path of armored spearheads. Logistics, once strained by extended lines, now supported a steady push eastward. The American victory at Arracourt also had a significant effect on military analysis. For decades, German Panthers have been regarded as nearly invincible against Allied armor. Yet the battle demonstrated that numerical superiority and coordination could offset the technical advantages of superior tanks. Historians later emphasized the importance of combined arms tactics, maneuver warfare, and the adaptability of crews under pressure. The Shermans, though weaker individually, succeeded because American forces integrated artillery, reconnaissance, and mobility into a system that leveraged their strengths while mitigating weaknesses. The psychological impact was equally profound. For American tank crews, the victory reinforced confidence. Young men from rural towns, farm boys, as they were called, realized they could face and defeat formidable German armor through skill, teamwork, and disciplined aggression. Letters, diaries, and post-battle reports describe a mixture of relief, pride, and exhaustion. Soldiers understood that their success was not accidental but the result of deliberate tactics, constant training, and rapid decision-making. For German commanders, the result was humbling. The failed counterattack at Arracourt exposed vulnerabilities in hastily assembled units. Over-reliance on superior machinery could not compensate for poor reconnaissance, inadequate coordination, or inexperienced crews. It underscored the risks inherent in deploying powerful but mechanically complex tanks under operational pressures without sufficient support. Beyond the immediate battlefield, Arracourt influenced subsequent engagements in the Lorraine campaign. With German armored reserves reduced, Allied forces faced less concentrated resistance in the months that followed. The Third Army's advance into eastern France and toward the Saar River encountered fewer heavily armored counterattacks. Operational plans began to reflect lessons learned at Arracourt. Prioritize coordination, use terrain intelligently, and integrate supporting arms rather than relying solely on individual tank performance. Ultimately, the battle became a case study in the evolution of armored warfare. It showed that even under conditions of apparent technological inferiority, effective tactics, leadership, and flexibility could achieve decisive results. The victory of the farm boys and Shermans over the feared Panthers was not simply a stroke of luck. It was the outcome of doctrine, training, and the human factor in war. And as the fog lifted from the Lorraine countryside in late September, the American forces pressed onward, carrying with them the confidence of a victory that would echo through armored warfare history. The Battle of Arracourt was more than a clash of machines. It was a test of human skill, decision-making, and adaptability under fire. The young American tank crews, farm boys from small towns across the United States, faced a foe that seemed invincible on paper. The Panthers were faster, better armored, and armed with guns that could destroy a Sherman at long range. Yet in the fog-shrouded fields of Lorraine, these advantages mattered less than coordination, initiative, and the courage to act decisively in uncertain conditions. The battle demonstrated the limits of technological superiority. Raw firepower alone could not guarantee victory. Terrain, visibility, and tactical ingenuity played equal roles. American crews used hills, hedgerows, and villages to conceal movement, while artillery and reconnaissance created a laid defense that disrupted the German advance. The fog neutralized long-range advantages, forcing engagements into ranges where Shermans could maneuver and strike effectively. Every decision, every calculated risk, mattered. At its heart, Arracourt was a story of human determination. These young soldiers, many of them far from home and inexperienced in combat, proved that skill, training, and trust in one another could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. They turned fear into focus, chaos into coordinated action, and disadvantage into triumph. Historically, the battle challenged perceptions of armored warfare. Military analysts and historians recognize that doctrine, leadership, and integration of combined arms could outweigh even the most formidable machines. Arracourt became a model for understanding how flexibility and adaptability, rather than sheer technological might, could decide outcomes in modern mechanized warfare. As the sun set over the Lorraine fields, the remains of tanks, both Sherman and Panther, stood silent, reminders of the violence that had passed. Yet beyond destruction, the battle left a lasting lesson. In war, the greatest weapon is often the human mind and the will to act decisively. The young Americans at Arracourt were outgunned, yet unstoppable, and their victory would echo in military history as a testament to courage, ingenuity, and the unyielding spirit of those who fight not just with machines, but with knowledge, teamwork, and resolve.